Hey guys, tonight we descend into the scorched, sweat-soaked world of a man who didn't just survive the Middle Ages, he suffered through every second of it. The medieval blacksmith. You've probably seen him in video games or movies, hammering glowing steel while sparks fly like fireworks. Noble, strong, stoic. Yeah, no. The real story? He was choking on smoke, covered in burns, working 16 hours a day for people who threatened him if their swords broke. This wasn't some honorable craft. It was pain, fire, and endless orders from lords who never paid on time. This is the disturbing life of a medieval blacksmith. And trust me, by the end of tonight, you'll never look at a horseshoe the same way again. So, before you get too cozy, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this strange little corner of quiet storytelling. And drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's strangely comforting to know who else is drifting off with us around the world. Now get comfortable, let the day melt away, and we'll drift back together into the quiet corners of the past. You wake up coughing soot into your mouth. The air tastes like burnt leather and regret, thick and gritty, like the forge crawled down your throat in the night and made itself comfortable. Your lungs rattle like an old bellows. One eye is crusted shut, the other stares into the half-dark of a room that never fully sleeps. The fire in the corner has slouched into a pile of sullen embers, still alive enough to remind you that your bed is approximately 2 feet from an open flame. You blink. The ceiling is smoke-stained wood, blackened by years of near misses and actual disasters. You lie still for a moment, half hoping you died in the night. But no, your leg itches and your stomach gurgles. Alive again, damn it. You sit up. Slowly. Everything creaks. Your back, your knees, the wooden cot beneath you. The straw mattress coughs out a thin puff of ash and rat dander. The blanket slides off, stiff with old sweat and melted wax. You're not entirely sure when it was last washed, but you do know it caught fire once. You pat yourself down. No new burns. Just the old ones, scabbed over in familiar patterns like a map of where you've been and what's tried to kill you. Your hands are cracked and blackened, nails permanently rimmed with soot. The left one has a blister the size of a plum. You poke it. It weeps something yellow. Breakfast. Your forge sits 3 paces away, hunched like an angry god waiting to be fed. The coals whisper when the wind slips through the wall boards. You can't remember if you shut the door last night. Doesn't matter. Nothing worth stealing. Just rusting tongs, cracked leather bellows, and a pile of horseshoes that no one paid for. The floor is a mixture of dirt, straw, and iron shavings. Your toes find something sharp. A nail. Still warm. You wonder if you made it yesterday, or if it somehow spawned itself out of spite. You grope for your shirt. A linen thing that used to be white, now a patchwork of scorch marks and grease. You pull it over your head, and it sticks to your back in the places where your skin isn't fully healed. You hiss between your teeth. The sound of pain is as routine as prayer now. You shuffle toward the forge, passing a rusting water bucket that smells like yesterday's sweat and 2 dead flies. You splash some on your face anyway. It's cold and gritty, like being slapped by a small, annoyed ghost. You kick the bellows awake. The forge exhales. The coals flare orange, casting flickering light on the walls that makes the tools look like they're moving. For a moment, you think one of the hammers is watching you. You blink again, just the smoke playing tricks, or the lack of sleep, or maybe the fire really is alive and planning a mutiny. Hard to say. Your breakfast sits on a crooked shelf, a chunk of black bread, a hunk of cheese that sweats even in the cold, and a flask of weak ale that tastes like moss and old pennies. You chew slowly. The bread cracks a molar. The cheese smells faintly of hoof. The ale goes down like warm spit. You stare at the anvil while you eat. It stares back. You both know what's coming. You've got 5 orders due by sundown. 2 scythes, 1 door hinge, a breastplate for a knight who insists it be impressive, and a pile of nails big enough to build a cathedral. You have 1 apprentice. He's 12 and afraid of fire. You have 3 fingers wrapped in cloth and a shoulder that hasn't moved properly since that accident with the cartwheel. But the work won't do itself, and the fire never waits. You wipe your mouth with the back of your hand, smear ash across your cheek, and sigh. Another day in the forge. Another day of burning, bending, hammering, cursing. You stand up. Your knees pop like roasting chestnuts. The heat hits your face. The hammer waits. And the anvil begins to sing. Breakfast arrives not with joy, but with obligation. It sits on a warped wooden shelf beside your tools, wrapped in yesterday's soot and the vague hope of calories. A hunk of black bread, dense enough to qualify as a weapon, stares back at you like it's daring you to chew. The crust is so hard it has geological layers, and there's a chip in one corner that might have come from your own tooth last week. You pick it up anyway. Because that's what you eat now. Bread that's been toasted by proximity to fire and regret. There's cheese too, if you can call it that. It's gray at the edges and sweating despite the cold morning. It smells like old milk trapped in a boot, which is probably not far from how it was made. You slice off a piece with your smallest blade, the one you use for carving hinge pins, and pretend not to notice the mold doing its best impression of topsoil. You smear it across the bread like mortar on a brick, and take a bite. It tastes like defeat. The ale's warmer than you remember, and thinner too. More water than grain, but water's not safe and hasn't been since the stream turned into a moving soup of waste and chicken feathers. At least beer won't poison you quickly. You drink straight from the flask, a dented tin thing that leaks if tilted too far left. The ale foams at the lip, then disappears down your throat like a memory you wish you could forget. It hits your stomach with the enthusiasm of a small, angry dog. You eat standing up because your bench is already covered in nails, and moving them would require energy. You chew slowly, each bite a negotiation between your molars and the rock-like center of the loaf. Bits flake off and drift to the floor, where they join a growing carpet of iron shavings and mystery crumbs. You brush a few off your chest with a rag hanging from your belt. It's technically a rag. Realistically, it's a torn piece of linen you once used to bandage your thumb after you stabbed it with a file. It hasn't been washed since. You wipe your face anyway. The soot only smears. You pause to cough. Deep, rattling, chest scraping. You bend forward, spit a dark clump into the ashes beside the forge, and wonder briefly if your lungs are starting to liquefy. Probably not. Probably just another side effect of sleeping 6 feet from open flame and spending your days inhaling powdered metal. You lean against the wall while the forge breathes in time with you, a rhythm forged in misery and routine. Outside, a rooster crows like it's proud to be alive. You hate him. You've hated him for months. His smug, feathery joy grates on your nerves like a dull rasp. Inside, the air is thick with smoke and old heat. The bread's gone. The cheese is not. You stare at it for a moment, consider one more bite, then decide to live another day. You wrap it back in its cloth and toss it onto the shelf like a curse. The ale's almost empty. You take one final swig, swirl the dregs in your mouth, and grimace. There's a bit of grit in it, probably ash, or maybe rust. You swallow anyway. You glance at the fire. It's waiting. Always waiting. You can hear it whispering again, low and crackling, like a promise or a threat. Your hammer leans against the anvil, its handle stained with sweat, grease, and years of your skin. You wipe your hands on your trousers, take a breath, and reach for the tongs. You've eaten, which means you've run out of excuses. Time to feed the forge. Your clothes live in a pile near the forge, stiff with smoke and sweat, barely distinguishable from yesterday's ash heap. Technically, they're garments. Realistically, They're cloth-shaped reminders that you gave up on comfort somewhere around your third back blister. You pull on your tunic first. A wool thing once dyed brown, now stained with enough soot and blood to pass for camouflage. It's torn at the shoulder and crusted under the arms. The collar stretched from a dozen mornings of yanking it over your smoke-scorched head. It smells like an old boot left in a chimney. Your trousers are worse. Stiff at the knees, fraying at the hems, and held together by sheer spite. One leg is slightly shorter than the other because you got too close to the forge 2 summers ago, and the wool shriveled like salted snails. The patch on the inner thigh is leather, badly stitched, half-scorched, and slick, with something that might be grease, or maybe just sorrow. You hike them up anyway, wincing as a fresh seam grazes a week-old burn. The pain is sharp, immediate, and familiar, like an old friend who shows up just to insult you. You wrap your belt twice around your waist, because the buckle broke during a coughing fit last week, and you haven't had time to fix it. The new hole you stabbed into it with a nail doesn't line up quite right, so the whole thing sits at a slant, which is fitting, because so do you. The belt holds your rag cloth for wiping metal shavings, your smallest set of tongs, and a knife you don't remember sharpening but always seems sharp enough to open your own skin. Your shoes are a medieval joke. Leather uppers blackened by 1,000 dropped coals, tied together with frayed twine and the ghost of functionality. The left one flaps when you walk, like a duck with a broken foot. The right one has a nail poking through the sole, but you've built up a callus there, so it only hurts when it rains, which it did last night. You jam your feet in, grimacing as something cold and squishy settles under your toes. Probably water, possibly a rat. You choose not to look. You go to reach for your apron, the thick leather one meant to guard your chest and thighs from molten betrayal. But it's stiff as a plank and smells like a scorched animal. You haven't had the heart to wash it since you used it to smother that grease fire, the one that almost took your eyebrows and did take your dignity. You sling it over your head anyway. The straps creak. The neck hole scrapes your collarbone. It's less protection and more a flag of surrender. You tie a rag around your forehead, mostly to keep the sweat from running into your eyes, but also because it keeps your hair from igniting when the forge belches too hard. The fabric is damp and smells faintly of beer and vinegar. You've been meaning to replace it. You've been meaning to do a lot of things. But the anvil calls louder than your to-do list. You glance in the cracked metal plate you've repurposed as a mirror. What stares back is a man-shaped smudge. Skin gray with soot, eyes hollowed from 1,000 sleepless nights, and a beard that grows in patches because fire doesn't care about symmetry. You're 28. You look 58. And not a wise, wizardly 58. A knuckle-dragging, lung-wheezing, spine-warped 58. You don't dress in the morning. You armor up for war. War against iron. War against exhaustion. War against another day of standing so close to flame that your very soul starts to sweat. And the worst part? You're still underdressed. The moment you step into the workshop, it greets you like an angry beast. The heat doesn't waft. It slams into your face, thick and immediate, a wall of breath from some infernal god that never blinks. The forge is already awake, hissing and rumbling like it's hungry for something more than coal. You haven't even touched it yet, but your shirt sticks to your back, soaked through in places you didn't know could sweat. The smoke curls upward, lazy and gray, until it finds the rafters and lingers like a curse no priest has bothered to lift. The bellows wheeze with effort. You've patched them so many times they're more stitched than leather, but they still work, barely. You step on the pedal and feel the floor shift beneath you, because your foundation isn't stone, it's dirt and splinters and hope. The forge belches in response, flames licking higher, illuminating soot-coated beams and walls stained with heat scars. A few old burn marks climb up one post like they're trying to escape. You don't blame them. You lift the iron tongs with your right hand and immediately regret it. The handle's hot because of course it is. You dropped them too close to the coals last night and forgot to move them. Now your palm blisters anew, another layer in the tapestry of damage that wraps your body like second skin. You hold the metal piece steady in the coals while the fire roars, and within seconds, tiny sparks spit upward and bite at your arms. You don't flinch. That stopped being an option around the fifth burn. Now you just hiss through your teeth and keep going. The anvil stands in the center like a stubborn old god, unmoved, uncaring, impossible to please. Every strike of your hammer rings out, loud enough to rattle your teeth. The echo bounces off the walls, through your chest, and directly into the part of your brain responsible for rational thought. The sound is sharp, clean, deafening. You're certain it's permanently reshaped your eardrums. You'll never hear silence again. Just that endless metallic scream, over and over, until death kindly removes the anvil from your skull. You try to keep rhythm, heat, strike, quench, repeat, but the metal is temperamental. 1 second too long in the coals, and it softens into a puddle of useless. 1 second too short, and it refuses to bend. You tap, test, adjust, all while your shirt soaks through with sweat, and your knees start to shake. Your left eye is twitching again. You pretend not to notice. The walls of the shop drip with condensation from the heat, even when it's cold outside. You can see the moisture gather in corners and around the warped windows, which haven't opened properly in years. Not that fresh air would help. The smell inside is permanent. Burnt leather, old smoke, singed hair, and despair. Your eyebrows haven't grown back in even lines since the last flare-up. They look like someone tried to sketch them with a coal stick during a small earthquake. You pause to sip from your flask and nearly knock over the quench barrel. The water inside is black with iron and sediment and smells vaguely of soup gone wrong. You're not sure when you last changed it, or if it's water at all anymore. You dunk a glowing rod into it and the hiss is violent, instant, angry. Steam fills the air and clings to your face. You close your eyes and inhale it anyway. The burn is gentle compared to the forge. You cough again. The kind of cough that starts low in the belly and scrapes its way out. You spit to the floor and something dark comes with it. You ignore it. Everything in this workshop is an accident, waiting to happen, or already happening. Every tool is sharp, heavy, or both. Every corner is jagged. Every breath could be your last if the fire decides to leap a little higher. You've accepted it, the risk, the injury, the daily flirtation with combustion. Because this place doesn't just want your labor, it wants your life. The anvil does not love you. It does not hate you either. It simply exists. Cold, unmoved, and eternally ready for more. More hammering, more shaping, more sacrifice. You stand before it every day like a penitent before an altar, offering metal instead of prayers, and in return it gives you blisters, noise, and the slow, creeping erosion of your will to live. You could drop dead at its feet, and it would still wait for the next strike. Your hammer arm has gone numb again. That's how you know the job's going well. The nails you're pounding out are crude but passable. No one's asking for beauty. They want utility. Fast, cheap, and preferably yesterday. You line up each glowing rod on the anvil's face, hammer it flat, twist it sharp, clip the head, and toss it into the bucket with the others. Each one hisses, like it's mad to be finished. Like it resents being useful. When the smithy door creaks open, you don't bother looking up. It's always the same. A farmer with a plow in pieces, a foot soldier wanting a blade he can't afford, a stable hand demanding shoes for a horse that kicks harder than a mule on fire. The farmer doesn't say good morning. He spits in the corner, gestures at the iron mess in his hands, and mutters something about last time being better. You nod, not because he's right, but because arguing costs energy you no longer have. You quote him a fair price. Too fair, actually, considering the iron shortage and your dwindling coal pile. He scoffs like you've insulted his dead grandmother. Says something about the good smith down in Holbridge doing it cheaper. You ask him politely if the good smith in Holbridge is currently standing here, holding the broken plow in your face. He doesn't answer. Just drops the pieces on your workbench and leaves without another word. No handshake, no thank you. The anvil watches the whole exchange. You can almost hear it judging you. Later, a young soldier staggers in with a blade snapped at the hilt and dried blood on his boots. He wants a new one, stronger, sharper, fast. You take the broken sword in your hands and feel the fracture where the grain failed. Poor forging. Probably not yours, but it might have been. You don't keep track. The soldier wants it cheap. He's got coin, but not enough, and says he'll bring the rest after the next skirmish. He won't. You both know that. You hammer out the new blade anyway. The steel sings, and not in a joyful way. It screams as you bend and beat it into shape. Each strike echoes with the knowledge that this weapon will be buried in someone's ribs by week's end. Maybe the soldier's. Maybe not. You don't ask anymore. You just temper, quench, and move on. At sundown, your pile of finished work looks impressive, until you remember most of it is unpaid. Nails that'll hold together barns no one invites you into. Hinges for doors that shut in your face. Axes for men who can't spell smith, but know exactly how to complain when the handle pinches. Your hands are raw. Your back is a knot of agony. Your shirt is soaked through with sweat that smells faintly of copper. And the anvil? Still waiting. It doesn't care that your stomach growls. It doesn't care that your left thumb won't stop bleeding. It doesn't care that you haven't spoken to anyone kindly in 2 weeks and might forget how. It only wants iron and impact. And it always wins. They come in waves, grimy, armed, loud. They track mud across your threshold, knock soot from the rafters, and smell like wet dogs stuffed into chainmail sacks. You don't get to choose your customers. You get whoever's desperate, dangerous, or dumb enough to believe they can haggle with a man holding a hammer. Some offer coin, most offer promises. The worst ones offer nothing but entitlement and steel that you recognize because your own hands made it. Today it's a farmer with a goose and a chipped hoe. The goose honks every time you move, like it's personally offended by your face. The hoe is broken at the neck, snapped clean where the iron meets the wood. Again, you tell him how much it'll cost in actual money, and he laughs like you told a joke. He nudges the goose forward like it's a prized stallion and mumbles something about fine meat and fresh eggs. You remind him that you're a blacksmith, not a bloody tavern. He shrugs and leaves the goose anyway. Now you've got company. Then comes a merchant with a bent wagon axle and the attitude of a man who's never had to carry anything heavier than a feathered cap. He talks fast, gestures faster, and calls your workshop quaint. You ask if he wants it fixed or just judged. He waves a hand, tells you he's in a hurry, and starts offering trade. 3 bolts of moth-eaten wool, a half bottle of watered wine, and a smile so smug it could melt tin. You hand the axle back, bent worse than before. He pays in coin, quietly. You're halfway through reshaping a barrel hoop when the local knight arrives. You know it's him before he even speaks, because the ground starts shaking with the weight of his ego. He ducks through your doorway in full plate, polished at least a month ago, and now dull with dirt and pride. He's sweating before he's fully inside, huffing like a stuck pig in a tin corset. He removes his helmet, revealing a face that's mostly nose and disdain, and drops his gauntlets onto your workbench like they belong there. He doesn't say hello. He wants his armor cleaned. Not repaired, not reforged, just cleaned. He says it like a command, like you're his servant, and not the man who forged the rivets holding his sorry ribs together. You ask what he expects you to clean it with. Water? Ash? The rag soaked in grease and blood you keep in your apron pocket? He sniffs and says, "Whatever it is you people use." You people. as if he didn't beg for a new gorget 2 months ago when he took a lance to the neck and cried like a child. You quote him a price. He laughs, then sets his hand on the pommel of the sword hanging from his hip. It's a good sword, balanced, sharpened, hammered with a fuller running true from base to tip. You made it for him. You even marked the tang with your initials, and now it's being used as a threat because he doesn't want to pay for polish. You agree, through clenched teeth, to do it for half. Not because you're scared, because you're tired. And you know that if you say no, he'll either take the work by force or tell the Baron that you're difficult. Difficult blacksmiths don't get contracts. Difficult blacksmiths vanish into ditches. By the end of the day, your bench is covered in dented tools, cracked hinges, and a pile of feathers from the goose that still hasn't shut up. Your hands are raw, your patience thinner than your ale, and your nose is full of rust and rot. And tomorrow, they'll come again. With their chickens, their swords, and their complete disregard for how badly you want to hammer something into their teeth. Preferably something you made yesterday. You bring the hammer down hard, and the sound it makes is not just noise, it's violence. The metal shrieks beneath it, sparks erupting in furious little explosions that dance across your arms like fireflies with a grudge. The heat licks your face, warm and familiar, until it turns sharp and biting, the kind that makes your eyelids twitch and your scalp sweat. You keep swinging, the rhythm steady, relentless, almost hypnotic. It's not music, it's not art, it's survival, measured in hammer strokes and molten pain. The vibrations travel straight through the grip, up your wrist, and into your elbow, where they settle like unwanted guests and throb until the joint feels like it might come apart. That elbow's been ruined for years, ever since you slipped on a wet stone and caught yourself on the corner of the anvil. You heard something tear inside, and then kept working, because what else were you going to do? Ask a priest to heal it? Ask a barber to saw it off? No, you just wrapped it in leather and hoped the pain would learn manners. It didn't. Your shoulders grind every time you lift the hammer, a creaking, scraping reminder that your bones are no longer on speaking terms with your muscles. You shift your stance to ease the pressure, but it only moves the pain from one joint to another, like passing a screaming child from arm to arm. There is no position that feels good anymore, only degrees of bad. The metal fights back, like it knows it's being reshaped against its will. When it hits the anvil cold, it screams, a high-pitched wail that cuts through the shop and into your skull like a dagger dipped in bees. You've stopped flinching. You don't even notice how loud it is until you realize you're no longer hearing it equally in both ears. The left one rings constantly now, a thin, shrill whistle that keeps you company even in sleep. If this keeps up, you'll lose it entirely. You pause to adjust the iron piece with your tongs and see the burn forming along your forearm. It looks like someone pressed a red-hot rope against your skin. You didn't even feel it happen. The nerve endings there have long since been seared into apathy. You'll notice the pain later when you go to scrub it and the skin comes off in strips. You used to treat burns with butter or ash or whatever the local herbalist said was good that week. Now you just wrap them in rags and sweat through the healing process. You hammer again. The metal bends. Not enough. You reheat it. The fire welcomes it back like an old friend, crackling with approval. You stand near the edge of the forge and breathe it in, smoke curling into your lungs and settling somewhere near your spine. You cough once, twice, and taste iron, not the good kind. The anvil is hot. Your fingers are slick. The hammer slips once and catches your thumb on the way down. You don't scream. You just hiss, drop the tool, and stare at the purpling nail that's already beginning to swell. Blood wells up under the surface. You press it flat against your apron and grind your teeth until the throbbing evens out. Then you pick up the hammer and keep going. Because if you stop working, you don't eat. And if you don't eat, you don't work. And if you don't work, the Baron sends someone else to make nails and blades and horseshoes, and that someone else might do it cheaper or cleaner or not at all. So you swing again, and the forge roars, and the anvil screams, and you listen, half deaf, half broken, and fully owned by the fire. The apprentice arrives before dawn because he's scared of what happens if he doesn't. You didn't tell him to show up that early. You don't have to. The look you gave him the first time he showed up late has echoed in his little brain every morning since, louder than any church bell. He's 11, maybe 12. It's hard to tell under all the soot and fear. He barely speaks, except to apologize for things that aren't his fault. He calls you sir in the same tone a man uses to talk to a bear that's blocking the only path out of the woods. His name is Jory, though you keep forgetting it. Doesn't really matter. He's not a person so much as an extra pair of hands, usually shaking, often burnt. His job is simple. Keep the fire alive, fetch what's hot without dropping it, and try very hard not to die. Some days he manages 2 out of 3. He feeds the coal like it owes him money, sweat soaking through the back of his shirt as he pumps the bellows with all the strength his matchstick arms can muster. The bellows are almost as big as he is, and when they stick, which is often, he goes red in the face trying to free them, like a dying fish trying to flip back into the river. He's already lost 2 fingernails, one to a wayward hammer blow, the other to a pair of tongs that slipped and bit him like a snake made of iron. You wrapped his hand in rags, soaked with vinegar, and told him to keep using the other one. He didn't cry out loud, just hissed through his teeth and nodded like you were a priest and this was penance. That's the thing about apprentices. They don't quit. They just wear down until the idea of stopping feels more dangerous than continuing. He watches you constantly, like a dog waiting for its owner to tell it what not to do. You don't offer much in the way of instruction. Mostly you grunt, point, and shout when something goes wrong. And something always goes wrong. Like yesterday when he tripped over the quench bucket and nearly took your knee with him, or the time he fed green wood into the forge and smoked the both of you half blind. He apologized for that for 3 days straight, even after you forgot what he was talking about. But there are moments, small, rare ones, where he does something right. He'll pass you the right tool without being asked, or keep the fire at just the right temperature for a full hour. You'll nod, maybe grunt with a little less irritation, and that will be his reward. No coin, no praise, just the absence of your usual contempt. And for him, that's enough. That's everything. Sometimes you look at his hands, tiny, blistered, shaking, and wonder if this was you once. If there was a day when you stood where he is, terrified, sore, and hopeful in a way that feels impossible now, you try not to dwell on it. The fire doesn't care about nostalgia. Neither does the anvil. By midday, his face is streaked with soot and sweat, eyes wide from the time he nearly set his sleeve on fire trying to grab a hot rivet. You slapped the flames out with your bare hand before they caught hold. He looked at you like you were a god. You looked at him like he was a particularly clumsy problem. He'll be back tomorrow. They always come back, because this is the only path out of hunger that doesn't involve thieving or dying young in someone else's war. He'll learn, or he'll burn. Either way, the forge keeps going, and you'll still forget his name. You don't feel it right away. The bar of iron slips as you twist it in the tongs, catches the edge of the anvil wrong, and flips sideways just as your other hand reaches for the hammer. Then it's there, hissing metal against skin, a sudden wet sting that spreads like lightning up your arm. You drop the tool and stumble back, clutching your forearm. The skin sizzles. You can smell it, that unmistakable blend of meat and misery. You grit your teeth and hiss, not because it helps, but because screaming would mean stopping. And you don't have time to stop. The order's due today. Horseshoes for the Baron's prized gelding, a set of nails for the carpenter rebuilding the chapel roof, and some twisted decorative iron nonsense for a merchant's wife who wants a candle holder shaped like a swan. All of it needs finishing. None of it will wait for your skin to grow back. The pain is sharp at first, pure and electric, but it dulls quickly into a throbbing heat the kind that makes your vision blur around the edges. You yank off your apron and dig through the drawer under the bench, past rusted nails, bent chisels, and a small jar of something thick and gray. You pop the lid and sniff. Lard, probably. Might have been bacon grease at some point. Or ointment from the healer 2 villages over. Either way, it smells like spoiled butter and wax. You scoop out a lump with your fingers and smear it over the burn. It stings so badly your knees nearly give out. You don't bother cleaning the wound. You don't have water clean enough, and the forge fire kills most things anyway. That's the lie you tell yourself as you wrap the burn in a strip of linen torn from an old shirt. The cloth sticks almost immediately. You clench your jaw and tie it off with your teeth, then flex your hand to make sure you still can. Barely. Good enough. The hammer is still on the ground, waiting for you like a disappointed father. You pick it up with your good hand, test the weight, and get back to it. Each strike sends a ripple of pain through your arm, sharp enough to make your eyes water. But the bar of iron is still hot, and the hoof shape is starting to come through. You can't stop now. Not unless you want to start again from nothing. The apprentice doesn't say a word. He saw the whole thing, heard the sizzle, smelled the flesh. His face has gone pale beneath the soot, but he doesn't move. Just stands there holding the tongs, knuckles white, waiting for you to tell him what next. You don't. You just gesture for more coal and keep swinging. By late afternoon, the burn is pulsing under the wrap like it has its own heartbeat. You can feel the skin blistering, stretching, ready to split. You keep your sleeve rolled down to hide it from customers. But every time someone steps through the door, the pain spikes, like it knows you're pretending it's not there. The Baron's steward arrives to collect the shoes. He doesn't look at you, just counts the pieces, sniffs at the nails, and grunts. No coin. He says it'll be sent later. You nod. Later never comes. You hand over the goods, and he walks out without once acknowledging that your arm is literally cooking beneath its bandage. You close the forge door after sunset, your arm hot enough to light a candle. You don't eat, you don't sit. You just lie on the floorboards beside the fire and listen to your own blood thumping against ruined skin. You'll be lucky if the flesh doesn't go bad. But luck left this place long ago. You're halfway through straightening a scythe blade when the knock comes. 3 short raps against your door, frantic and wet sounding. You already know it's not good. No one knocks that fast, unless something is broken, bleeding, or on fire. Sometimes all 3. You wipe your hands on your apron, mutter a prayer to no one in particular, and open the door to find a boy clutching his arm and trying very hard not to scream. His face is twisted, sweat pouring down his forehead, and there's blood. So much blood. You can already see the bone. They don't go to the priest anymore. The priest has holy water and vague metaphors. You have fire and tongs. You usher the boy in and clear a space on the bench, pushing aside a half-formed hinge and a pile of slag. His mother trails in behind him, wringing her hands and mumbling about a cartwheel and a misstep and how it happened so fast. You don't listen to the whole story. You've heard all the variations. Something fell. Something broke. Someone screamed. That's always the ending. You fetch the tongs. Not the forging pair. The smaller ones you keep in the drawer with the twine and the dull knives. They've pulled teeth, nails, thorns, even a fish hook once, though that man didn't live long after. You douse them in alcohol from the small flask under the bench, not because it helps much, but because it makes you feel slightly less like a butcher. The boy bites down on a block of wood as you examine the break. It's bad. The kind of bad that's going to make a new sound when you set it. You wrap his arm in cloth and brace it with a pair of splints you fashion from scrap wood and leather straps. He howls when you pull the bone into place, and you feel your stomach roll. You've done this 12 times, maybe more, but it never stops feeling like punishment. You cauterize the worst of the wound with a rod heated to red. He shakes as the metal touches flesh, eyes wide with that white, panicked look animals get before the butcher's knife. The smell is awful. a sickening mix of hair, sweat, and seared skin. You keep your face blank, because if you flinch, he'll think something's wrong, and everything's already wrong. When it's done, you give the boy a swig from your flask and send them on their way, his arm bound tight, eyes glassy. His mother offers you a dozen eggs you know she doesn't have and leaves them on the workbench anyway. You watch them walk down the lane, hoping he keeps the arm. You sit back down at your forge and notice the blood on your apron, your hands, the edge of the anvil. It's dried into the creases of your skin. You scrub at it with ash and spit and a piece of coarse cloth. It doesn't come out all the way. It never does. Later that week, a shepherd limps in with an arrowhead buried in his thigh. You don't ask how it happened. He doesn't offer. You give him a rag to bite and dig it out with your smallest chisel. He nearly passes out twice. You nearly do too. They say you've got a steady hand. They say your forge is as good as a healer's tent. You don't correct them. Let them believe it's skill, and not just the fact that no one else is willing. Because when something breaks in this village, bone, blade, or body, it comes here. To the man with fire, steel, and no medical training whatsoever. The smoke doesn't rise anymore. It hangs, thick and sour. It clings to the beams, the walls, your lungs. Every breath tastes like pennies in funeral pyres. You know what's in it. Lead from old castings, arsenic from ore that was supposed to be clean, sulfur from gods. No, what the miner scraped out of the earth and sold you cheap. The forge has become an alchemist's nightmare, and you're the test subject. You cough once, then twice, sharp and metallic, like your ribs are trying to fold inward. Your chest is tight before you even start the bellows. It's not the kind of tight that comes from exertion or strain. It's deeper, more permanent, a squeezing that sits behind the breastbone and dares you to breathe too deep. You light the coals anyway. The apprentice gives you a wary glance, but says nothing. He knows better. You've both been working inside this slow, smoky tomb long enough to recognize the warning signs. You just ignore them more efficiently. Your teeth ache today, not from grinding, but from something sour and deep, like they're rotting from the roots out. You rub your jaw and wince, but there's no blood, no break, just that slow, throbbing pressure that makes eating a punishment and talking worse. You try to drink from the flask, and it sends a lightning bolt through your molars. You set it down. Water tastes like iron. Beer tastes like rust. Everything tastes like something that shouldn't be inside a body. The ringing in your ears hasn't stopped in days. At first, you thought it was the anvil, an echo caught in the back of your skull from one too many hammer strikes. But now, it's there, even in the silence. A high-pitched scream that never runs out of breath. It flares when you blink too hard. It spikes when you cough. You've started hearing whispers beneath it, like the forge is learning to talk. You haven't told anyone that part. You blame the fumes. Not just the smoke, but the invisible poison that seeps from molten metal. That oily haze that rolls off certain alloys when the heat gets too high and the air goes wrong. There's no word for it in your village, but you know what it does. You've seen the other smiths. Old men hunched over, coughing black and walking like their bones are filled with sand. You're halfway there. You try to ventilate the shop by cracking the shutters, but it doesn't help. The air outside is cold and wet, which turns the inside into a choking fog of smoke and steam. Your eyes sting. Your fingers twitch. You think you see shapes moving in the haze, but when you squint, it's just shadows cast by tools on hooks. Probably. You hammer through it anyway. Not because you want to, because the work doesn't care how many toxins are swimming in your bloodstream. It doesn't care about the tightness in your chest or the rattle in your breath. The merchant still needs those hinges. The knight still wants that sword reforged. The baron's steward still hasn't paid for the last set of nails, but you know he'll be back with more demands. By late afternoon, your head feels swollen. You lean against the wall, eyes closed, chest heaving. The apprentice says something, but his voice is distant, muffled like it's coming from behind a door. You nod, hoping it was a yes or no question. The fire flickers and hisses, and you swear it's laughing. You stand up, because lying down feels like giving up. You lift the hammer. Your hand shakes, but you grip tighter. You keep breathing, even though each breath is just another sip of poison. The priest comes at dawn, as if God's errands require your suffering before breakfast. He brings a list, not a request, not a favor, but a list, with neat little items scratched in charcoal like commandments. 70 nails, all the same length. No warping, no rust. For the glory of the chapel, he says, like holiness depends on your ability to pound red-hot rods into piety. He doesn't offer coin, only blessings, which you can't melt down, or eat, or trade for coal. You nod, not because you agree, but because you don't have the energy to argue with a man in robes whose hands have never blistered. He leaves as quickly as he came, muttering scripture under his breath, and you stare at the list like it personally insulted your mother. 70 nails. Fine. Add that to the 5 spearheads promised to the Baron's quartermaster before the end of the week, plus the replacement sword for the knight who snapped his in half showing off at the tavern. The spearheads must be strong. The nails must be straight. The sword must be impressive. You've got none of those things. You glance at your stockpile, hoping some miracle has occurred overnight. It hasn't. You're down to your last few bars of workable iron, and even they're pocked with impurities. You'd planned to stretch them across the next 3 days. Now you need them gone by tomorrow. You tell the apprentice to stoke the fire and find your gloves. What's left of them? One is fingerless. The other is just a suggestion of leather. The hammer slips on the second nail. Your grip is worse than usual today. Your fingers don't quite close all the way anymore. The joints are swollen, the skin cracked, and one knuckle is the wrong color entirely. You bend it back into place with a grimace and keep hammering. Each strike flares pain from your wrist to your elbow, but the shape of the nail begins to take form, thin and sharp and clean. 1 down, 69 to go. You pace your rhythm, switching arms when the left starts to tremble, which is always. The spearheads come next, wide and tapered, needing just enough elegance to look intentional and just enough bite to kill someone efficiently. You work through the ache, the ringing, the slow march of fatigue that creeps up your spine and settles behind your eyes. You don't stop. You can't. By mid-afternoon, your shirt is soaked, and the forge floor is littered with scrap, twisted nails, half-formed blades, and the occasional dropped rivet that rolls just out of reach, like it's mocking you. You're bleeding again, though you're not sure from where. Somewhere near the base of your thumb, maybe, or deeper. The burn from last week has reopened. You press it against your apron and let it clot there. The Baron's man arrives before sunset. He doesn't dismount his horse, just shouts through the window and tosses a cloth sack onto your porch like he's feeding chickens. It holds half the payment. You nod again, because there's nothing else to do, and stack the finished spearheads by the door. They gleam slightly in the fading light, and you wonder how many will survive their first battle. How many men will die holding your work? You return to the forge and start on the rest of the nails. The chapel needs them. The priest said something about rebuilding the altar rail, something about heaven and beauty and divine purpose. But all you see is another day's labor shaped into tiny, silent spikes. And still, no one thanks the hammer, or the hand behind it, or the man with no time, no iron, and fewer working fingers than yesterday. But they all get what they want. Somehow, you make sure of it. The rain starts just after dusk, slow at first, like the sky is clearing its throat. You ignore it. You always ignore it, because there's nothing to be done. The roof leaks. It's been leaking for 2 winters, and the patch job you did with scrap tin and good intentions failed about 2 hours after installation. You've meant to fix it properly, but fixing things takes time. And time is something you already traded away for half a barrel of nails and a promise from a merchant who never came back. By midnight, it's no longer a drizzle. It's an assault. Rain drums on the shingles like it's looking for a fight. The water finds its way in, dripping first through one corner, then another. Then all at once, it splashes onto your workbench, slides down the wall, pools near the hearth. You scramble to lift what tools you can onto higher shelves, but it's too late. The grinding wheel's soaked. The bellows are damp and won't breathe properly. A thin stream trickles across the floor and vanishes beneath the coal bin. You shove a bucket under the worst leak, but the bucket's already half full from last time and smells like mildew and something dead. The apprentice mutters something about blessing the rain, probably a leftover line from a priest or an optimistic mother. You glare at him until he shuts up. There's no blessing here, only rust. You wake up at dawn with a soaked blanket wrapped around your legs and your socks still wet from stepping in the puddle that formed under your cot. The damp has crept into your bones. Your back aches, your knee throbs, and you're fairly certain you have the beginning of trench foot, despite not being in a trench. You roll over and find your tunic clumped under your head like a failed pillow. It's damp, smells of coal dust and defeat, and you press your face into it anyway. Your tools haven't survived the night. The hammerhead is tinged orange. The tongs have begun to pit. Even the anvil has a film of moisture glinting on its surface like a warning. You wipe them down with a rag already soaked through and try not to curse. You fail, loudly. The apprentice flinches but doesn't stop dragging wet straw out of the corner. He's learned not to ask questions when your voice hits that particular octave. You can't light the forge. Not properly. The kindling is soaked, the coal is damp, and the air's too wet to hold a flame. You pump the bellows anyway, more out of spite than hope, and watch as smoke curls up and dies before it can rise. You try again, and again. Eventually something catches, but it's weak, struggling to live in a world determined to drown it, like everything else in this shop. The floor is a shallow swamp now. Nails float in it. Wood curls peel up from the planks like they're trying to escape. You watch water drip from the ceiling onto your quenching barrel and wonder what the boiling point of despair is. Your gloves are soaked. Your boots squelch when you walk. You wipe your face with your sleeve and only succeed in transferring the wet from one part of your body to another. You sit down beside the forge and feel the weight of everything, of the rust creeping across your tools, of the ache in your spine, of the slow realization that your roof is no longer just a problem. It's a sentence. You won't fix it. Not this week, maybe not ever. Not unless someone dies and leaves you their estate. And even then, you'd probably spend the coin on coal and bandages. The rain continues outside, endless and gray. The forge hisses, weak and coughing. You pull your knees to your chest, rest your chin on your arms, and breathe through the cold. And in the quiet, you cry. Just a little, because even iron breaks under water. You dream of the anvil, not as an object but as a weight, a sentient, ancient thing pressing slowly onto your chest, inch by inch, until your ribs creak like old beams. In the dream, your hands are burned and bound in iron rings, and every time you scream, sparks fly from your mouth instead of words. There's no forge, no fire, just smoke and pressure, and the sound of metal groaning somewhere deep beneath the earth. You wake, gasping. Your lungs rattle. You hack twice, then a third time, and feel something thick claw its way up your throat. You reach for the rag under your cot, the one that used to be white and now looks like it belongs in a battlefield surgeon's tent. You spit into it, black as usual, flecks of red this time. You fold it and lie there for a moment, staring at the cracked beams above your head, wondering if they look more unstable than yesterday, or if your eyes are just still blurry from the phlegm. The fire's already lit. The glow dances along the far wall, warm and flickering, too steady to be an accident. The apprentice beats you to it again. You hear the bellows working slow and steady, the soft wheeze and groan of leather and wood. He hasn't spoken yet. He never does until you do. But he's there, hunched near the forge, eyes dark from smoke, or lack of sleep, or both, poking at the coal like he's afraid it might bite. It's 4 a.m. Again. You sit up. Every joint cracks like someone snapping dry twigs. Your back feels like it's being held together with rusted nails. You try to stretch, but your right shoulder doesn't move the way it used to, and your fingers don't quite open all the way. You rub them until they do, mostly. Your dreams used to be different. Once, long ago, you'd dream of forests, of rivers, of places where the air smelled like rain instead of scorched iron. You'd wake with a start and realize you still had a chance to leave, to walk away from the fire and find somewhere else, someone else, anything else. Those dreams stopped years ago. Now it's always anvils and fire and hands that won't stop shaking. You dress in silence. The tunic's still damp from yesterday. The apron stiff with soot and sweat and blood you're fairly sure is your own. You grab your hammer from where it rests by the door, its handle worn smooth, grip darkened by years of effort and failure. You balance it in your palm like a priest holding a relic. The apprentice hands you a chunk of raw iron. You nod. He doesn't meet your eyes. The forge crackles, bright and violent, like it's mocking you for needing sleep in the first place. You stare into it for a long moment. There's comfort in its predictability. It burns. It consumes. It never pretends to be anything but cruel. You place the iron in the coals and wait. In the stillness, with your skin still sticky from night sweats and your breath still ragged from whatever's growing in your lungs, you realize you're not really awake. You just left one nightmare for another. And in this one, the anvil never leaves your chest. It just gets heavier. It takes 4 days. 4 days of sweat, soot, and shaping red-hot steel into curves that don't want to exist. You hammer until your elbow sings, bend until your fingers split, and file every edge smooth so the inside doesn't shred the skin it's supposed to protect. The breastplate gleams by candlelight, not polished. Nothing ever gets truly clean in your shop, but proud. You hold it in your hands and see something almost noble, something that might stop a blade, turn aside an arrow, or at least make a dying man feel a little less naked. The knight arrives late, as usual. His horse is enormous, bred more for intimidation than speed, and its hooves crack your stone path like a threat. He dismounts with the grace of a sack of flour, grunting as his feet hit the ground. The armor he's wearing now is a patchwork of dents and poor choices. You made none of it. That fact keeps you sane. He doesn't say hello, just demands the piece like it's late, like you haven't bled hours into its creation. You hand it over. He lifts it, frowns, and turns it around like he's trying to find a flaw that isn't there. Then he starts to put it on. There's a moment, brief but glorious, when the top clasps slide neatly into place. You exhale, just slightly. Maybe this time it will be easy. Maybe this time the weight of your work will be met with something approaching satisfaction. Then the bottom catches on his belly. He sucks in air, tries again, and the plates scrape together with a sound like 2 tombstones grinding. He yanks it down, grunts, and mutters something about your measurements being off. You watch as he strains against the edges, the metal bowing slightly around his gut like it's begging for mercy. Too tight, he says. Flat. Accusing. You blink. Your hand tightens on the workbench behind you. The leather stretches under your fingers. 4 days. You didn't sleep. You skipped 2 meals. You blistered your palm shaping that lower curve so it would contour, protect, move. And now the meat of a man who's never said no to a second portion has the audacity to say it's your fault. You consider murder. Just briefly. But you nod. You always nod. He wants it adjusted. Says you should add another ½ inch along the belly. Maybe loosen the shoulder plates so his arms don't feel restricted. You say, of course. Of course. even though what he needs isn't a better breastplate, it's a diet and a smaller ego. He leaves the piece behind and mounts his horse again with all the grace of a man falling sideways into a hole. He doesn't pay you. He says he'll return tomorrow. He says it like a warning. You stare at the armor long after he's gone. It looks smaller now, not because you shaped it wrong, but because reality is always smaller than expectation. You pick it up and feel the weight in your arms. Too much to wear comfortably, not enough to stop a lance. You toss it back on the work table and exhale through your teeth. Then you grab your tools, heat the forge, and begin the process of unmaking something you just made. Because in this trade, perfection is meaningless. Only appeasement pays. It starts with the smoke. Thick, black, always pouring out of your chimney like it's trying to escape something worse inside. It curls upward, twisting into strange shapes if you stare long enough. Shapes that might be animals, or spirits, or just the product of too many nights without sleep. The villagers see it too. They whisper when they pass. You hear them. You always hear them. Children dare each other to knock on your door, then run screaming when you open it. The butcher's wife makes the sign of the cross when you walk by, as if iron and calluses are marks of unholiness. The midwife, who still owes you for a set of hinges, is convinced your fire speaks in tongues. She says the hiss of quenching iron sounds like weeping. You tried to explain it once. Told her it was just steam meeting heat, that the hiss was water vapor in physics. She looked at you like you'd summoned something. Now you don't bother explaining. You don't have time to convince people that metal screams because it's hot, not haunted. You've got orders stacked to the rafters, coal running low, and an apprentice who still flinches every time you sneeze. And let's be honest, there are days when you wonder if they're not a little bit right. The way the forge glows at night when everything else is dark. The way sparks leap like fireflies possessed. The way the hammer feels like it has a mind of its own when you hit the rhythm just right. It's not magic, but it's close. The priest stopped coming by after you sharpened his garden shears and they accidentally sliced through the hem of his robe. He said nothing, but the next sermon included several pointed warnings about unnatural crafts and tempting fire. You heard every word from your workshop window. The next day, someone nailed a dried sprig of wolfsbane to your door. You left it there. Sometimes customers leave coin on your step instead of coming inside. They scrawl their orders on scraps of parchment, never signing their names. It's always horseshoes, hinges, or nails. Never weapons. No one wants to admit where their new dagger came from. And yet, they always come back. Because fear doesn't blunt a blade, and their superstitions won't split wood or hold a roof steady through the winter winds. Still, the rumors grow. They say your apprentice is your familiar, that you speak to the flames when no one's watching, that the iron you forge never rusts. You wish any of that were true. You wish the fire answered back. You wish the metal listened. All it does is burn and bend and break, just like you. A child once asked if you were cursed. Big-eyed, curious, not yet afraid. You told him no, then paused. Not cursed, you said. Just tired. He nodded like he understood, and maybe he did. Maybe exhaustion looks the same no matter your age. At night, when the village quiets and only the forge remains awake, the smoke still rises. It carries soot and sweat, and the faint echo of hammer strikes into the sky. It doesn't shape demons, but it doesn't shape angels either. It's just the evidence of your work. Hot, black, and endless. And if the villagers need to believe you're a sorcerer to explain it all, fine. Let them believe. You start bent and stay that way. The posture crept in slow, like rot in a beam. First just a tilt, then a slump, then a permanent curve etched into your spine by repetition and gravity and the anvil that rules your life. You haven't stood upright in months. If someone tied a string to your head and tried to pull it straight, they'd snap something. Probably you. The forge isn't built for comfort. It's built for containment. The ceiling's low, the bench is lower, and the work demands angles. Your body was never designed to hold for more than a minute, but you hold them for hours. 14 most days. More if the Baron's man shows up with another last-minute order and less than half a payment. You lean forward, shoulders grinding, hips locked, knees whispering threats they fully intend to keep. Your back has started making new sounds, not pops or cracks. Those would be too kind. These are deeper, internal, like old rope, tightening under strain, or bones remembering an old war. There's a spot just beneath your left shoulder blade that pinches every time you lift a hammer above chest height. Another along your lower spine that hums when you walk too far or breathe too deeply. You keep thinking you'll stretch it out, maybe sleep flat on your back instead of curled around the forge like a dying animal. You don't, because lying flat hurts more. You catch your reflection sometimes, in the ripple of a polished blade or the warped surface of a steel bowl, and you look like a question mark, a walking curve wrapped in soot and muscle. The apprentice hasn't asked about it. Not yet, but you've seen the way he watches. You climb stairs or lift coal. He sees how you pause mid-motion, not from hesitation, but because some part of you stopped cooperating without warning. When customers arrive, you straighten, not fully, just enough to seem passably human. It takes effort, the kind that makes you lightheaded and nauseous, like standing too quickly after a week in bed. They don't notice. They never do. Their eyes are on the blade, the horseshoe, the hinge, not the man behind it. You once asked a traveling physician if anything could be done. He laughed and said something about years of poor alignment and hard labor's price. Then he tried to sell you a poultice made from boiled nettles and honey. You paid him in old nails and told him to get out. There's a spot on your cot where your back fits, like a puzzle piece, curved and dented, shaped by repetition and grim acceptance. You used to shift positions at night, toss and turn like someone fighting off dreams. Now you wake up in the same shape you fell asleep in, coiled, locked, compact. There's no word for the particular kind of ache that starts in your spine and spreads like ink through the rest of you. It's not sharp, it's not stabbing, it's just there, always, like a second shadow. You thought maybe it would pass, that you'd adjust. You have, in a way. The pain became part of the job, then part of your walk, then part of your sleep. It's in your laugh, when you still have one. It's in your silence. No one asks if it hurts. They just ask if the sword is finished, if the rivets are tight, if the gate latch swings smooth. You nod, and you keep hunching, because the work doesn't care about posture, and neither does the world. You wake up to the sound of bells, not the kind that signal war or warning. Those have urgency. These are slower, rounder, meant to sound joyful. Today is a feast day, one of many throughout the year that arrive like unwelcome guests and ask for more than they bring. You already know what that means. You don't even get out of bed with hope in your chest. Just the dull weight of obligation, like iron that never cools. The first knock is the butcher. His cleaver needs sharpening, head badly. He smiles like it's a favor to ask you, as if grinding the edge down to something halfway lethal is a holy contribution. You don't charge him. No one expects you to. It's the feast. A gift, they say. A service. For the good of the village. You say nothing and take the blade. It's chipped along the spine. You wonder what he's been doing with it. Cleaving meat or hacking through old bones. While you work, the baker's son arrives, breathless and red-faced, saying the gate latch won't close and people will be bringing their carts through all day. You don't ask how it broke. You don't ask why it's your problem. You wipe your hands and walk the short path to the village square, where the gate lists like a drunk, one hinge rusted to hell and the other split down the middle. You patch it with wire and a spare pin pulled from a barrel of leftovers. It'll last through sundown. That's all it needs to do. Back in the shop, a farmer drops off 4 shoes and a 5th horse that kicks like it knows it's being cheated. You get kicked twice before it settles. Your thigh goes numb. You don't limp. Not yet. You hammer the shoes into shape while people string garlands through the trees and stack firewood near the spit. It's midday before anyone even offers you a scrap of bread. You chew it between hammer blows, too dry to swallow properly. They ask you to prepare the spit next. A long steel rod, rusted near the tip, bent from years of poor handling and bad luck. You straighten it over the forge while kids run past laughing, throwing flower petals like they mean something. One nearly knocks over your bucket of water. You don't yell. You just move it out of reach and keep going. By late afternoon, your hands ache from repetition. The fire's too low to bother building again, but there's still work to do. Someone wants a decorative hinge on the ale barrel. Not because it's needed, but because the priest is visiting and everything should look nice. You twist the iron into a vague spiral and nail it on. They thank you with a nod and a half mug of warm beer. The feast begins while you're cleaning the tongs. Music drifts through the shutters. Bad lute, worse singing. The smell of roasting meat wafts into the shop, thick and rich and taunting. You sit by the door and watch the meat. There's dancing in the square. The butcher wears a wreath of herbs on his head like he's king of something. Your apprentice tries to offer you a plate, but it's already half picked over, and the meat's gone cold. You wave him off. No one says thank you. Not really. A few nods. One pat on the shoulder from the miller, who's already too drunk to stand straight. They toast to the bounty of the harvest, the generosity of the saints, the strength of the village. Your name is not mentioned. You sit in the doorway, back aching, hands raw, stomach hollow, and you watch them celebrate the feast you built. It starts with a mistake. You're shaping a standard sickle, basic, dull work, for a farmer who grunts more than he talks, and your wrist gives halfway through the pull. The iron bends too far, curling tighter than you meant. You swear under your breath, grab the tongs and prepare to start over. But something about the shape catches your eye. It curves, then curves again, like a question mark inside a question mark. You run your thumb along the edge and feel a strange kind of promise in it. So, you keep going. You grind it differently, hone the edge just right. The second curve gives it weight, leverage. You imagine it slicing clean through stalks with half the effort. It's balanced, efficient, almost graceful. You add a better grip, wrap the handle in scrap leather, and stamp your mark low near the hilt. It's not just a tool, it's an idea. A small, sharp miracle forged in a haze of smoke and boredom. The farmer arrives the next morning, muddy and barefoot, as always. He barely looks at it, just snatches it from your hands, gives it a half-hearted shake like he's judging a fish, and grunts. You explain, quickly, that the curve helps. It slices from 2 angles, requires less force, and shouldn't snag. He scratches his beard, unimpressed. You doubt he understood half the words. He mutters something about trying it, and walks off without another glance. You watch him leave, and try not to feel stupid for being proud of it. 10 minutes later, he's back. The sickle is bent at the neck, not snapped, not shattered, just twisted beyond recognition, like he used it to dig a trench instead of harvest wheat. Which, of course, he did. You know this before he even opens his mouth. Still, he holds it out like it died of its own free will. Cheap iron, he says, sniffing, didn't last a row. You stare at the thing, your creation, warped and splattered with dirt. The blade is nicked, the edge dulled from contact with something harder than any stalk should be. You don't speak. If you do, it'll be something you'll regret. He waits, scratching at his chin, like a man weighing justice. Then, with the self-assurance of a man who knows your patience has no currency, he drops a single potato on your bench. 1. Not a sack, not a handful, just one. It rolls slightly and stops against your thumb. He nods, as if the matter's settled, and walks off. You consider throwing the potato at his back. You don't. It's food. You stare at the bent sickle and see the idea still buried in it. It could have worked. Maybe not for him. Maybe not in a village like this, where invention is just a fancy word for failure you haven't been blamed for yet. But the shape made sense. It was better, smarter, faster. No one will remember it. You toss the twisted blade into the scrap heap, where it lands with a clatter beside all the other good intentions. You pick up the potato, turn it in your hand, and wonder how many inventions died like this, ignored, broken, dismissed by someone too tired or too dull to see the future in a curve of iron. You take a bite. It's raw. Of course it is. The cold arrives without permission. It slips in under the door, through the cracks in the walls, down the flue of the forge, even when the fire's going. It lingers like a curse, biting through your clothes, burrowing into your bones. You light the forge before dawn, but it doesn't matter. The warmth doesn't stay. It huddles near the fire's mouth and refuses to spread, selfish and flickering. You hover close, gloved hands outstretched, trying to thaw your fingers enough to hold the hammer. The gloves are stiff with old fat and ash, so thick with soot they've forgotten their color. You rub goat lard into the seams each morning, not because it helps much, but because it keeps the leather from snapping like parchment. The stink clings to your skin no matter how hard you scrub. You used to use beeswax. Ran out of that last year. Goats don't complain when you steal their fat. You do it quietly now, while the village sleeps, because the last time you asked for tallow, the butcher laughed and said, "Don't you have fire for that?" Fire doesn't warm what's already frozen. Your fingers are the first to go. You don't even notice it first. Just a slow numbness, like they've fallen asleep and haven't decided to wake up. Then come the cracks. Thin, red, almost polite at first. Then they split wider, deeper, turning every grip into punishment. You bleed on the tongs. You bleed on the hammer. You bleed into the seams of your gloves, where it dries stiff and rubs open again the next day. You wrap them in linen until the cloth frays and sticks to the wounds. Then you use strips of old apron. You're out of clean cloth anyway. The apprentice doesn't speak much. He sees your hands and says nothing. Maybe he's afraid you'll ask for help. Maybe he's learned that help is a myth you can't afford. He keeps the coals fed, the bellows moving, and watches your hands closely. Once, he tried to hand you a mug of hot cider. You almost dropped it from the shock of heat. The mug sat on your bench all day, steam curling into the rafters while you tried to remember what warm fingers felt like. By midday, the forge is hot enough to sweat by, but only if you're close enough to burn. You stand in the center of your own prison. Frozen spine, blistered palms, aching wrists, and swing the hammer because that's what the day demands. You curse between breaths, not at the work, but at the cold that never leaves. You've known hunger, known smoke and pain and silence. But this cold feels personal. It whispers that you are not meant to survive. Your tools betray you in winter. The hammer slips more often. The tongs lose their grip. The metal cools too fast. Everything fights back. You move slower now. Not because you want to, but because frostbitten fingers don't care about your deadlines. The Baron's sword lies half-finished on the table. You've reshaped the hilt twice because your hands can't hold the curve. You don't think he'll notice the difference. At night, you try to sleep curled close to the embers, blanket wrapped tight, gloves still on. The fire fades too quickly, and you dream of warmth you never reach. You wake up with your hands tucked under your arms, like your body's trying to protect what little function remains. You flex each finger, wincing at the stiffness, the sting, the sound of dried scabs cracking open like old wood. You start the forge again before the sun rises, because no one pays a blacksmith with broken hands. The man with the velvet collar says, "The Lord will compensate you." He says it with a smile, one of those soft, oily things that slides off the face before you can pin it to anything true. He wears no armor but speaks like someone who commands it. He lays a gauntlet on your bench, dented, rusted, mismatched fingers, and tells you to restore it to its former glory. You nod, because you've learned that silence is safer than asking if there will be coin. There won't be. You work 2 days on that gauntlet. Buff the rust down to a whisper, reshape the plates, file the edges so they won't slice open the wearer mid-duel. You even stitch a fresh leather lining from scraps and hope. He returns, takes one glance, and calls it adequate. Then he disappears with it, tucked under his arm and a promise of payment, as soon as the Baron returns from his campaign. You don't ask when that is. You know better. Then the farmer. Always the farmer. He brings a broken plowshare and no explanation. You mend it in under an hour, and he mutters something about a bad harvest. He scratches his head, looks at the floor, and leaves behind 2 wrinkled apples and a nod. Not even a thank you this time. Just a nod, like your partners in some miserable, silent agreement. The tanner wants rivets, dozens. He'll pay in leather. You ask when. Soon. He pats your arm like you're his aging mule and leaves with a sack of iron bolts you poured an evening into while your dinner sat untouched. 3 weeks later, you catch sight of the same tanner selling belts in the square, your rivets holding them together. He doesn't look at you. Come back next week, they say. Every week. Like time is a circle, and you're too stupid to realize you're walking in it barefoot. You mark the debts on a wall, by the hearth, charcoal ticks and slashes that stretch like a prisoner's calendar. There's no more room, so you start carving them into the table. Names and promises. All of them worthless. Your apprentice watches, says nothing. You see the hunger in his eyes, the hesitation when you split the last heel of bread, crust dry and curling like old bark. He waits to see if you'll eat it. You hand it over. He takes it without thanks, and you don't expect one. You don't even feel the weight of the missing piece. You've learned how to ignore the hollow. You try to barter once. A sword for a sack of flour. The merchant laughs, says it's too heavy, too plain, too curved, too something. It'll never sell, he tells you. You spot the same design at the Lord's feast 3 days later, hanging from the hip of a knight who's never held a blade longer than his patience. Someone once told you, good craftsmanship will make you famous. They meant it as encouragement. They didn't say anything about hunger, or cold, or having to decide which tool to pawn when the apprentice outgrows his boots again. You hammer through the pain now, through the lies. You tell yourself that the next job might pay, that the next knock on the door will come with real coin, real thanks, real something. But when it comes, it's just another mouth asking for steel without offering anything but another story. And stories don't fill your stomach. You weren't even trying to impress him. The merchant came in late, trailing dust and overconfidence, and you were just finishing the hinge for the carpenter's shed. Simple enough, but clever. It folded twice, locking flush without pins, and could hold weight like a mule. A small solution to a stupid problem, but the kind of thing that might keep a roof from collapsing or a chest from spilling open mid-journey. You held it up without thinking, more proud than cautious, and said, "It folds in on itself, see?" He leaned in with wide eyes and a mouth that moved too fast, said it was ingenious, called you a craftsman of rare genius, words thick with syrup. You watched his eyes move, not at you, but at the hinge, cataloging it, dissecting it, memorizing the line of the joint and the way the metal curved back on itself like a snake swallowing its own tail. He didn't ask how you made it. He didn't need to. He offered you 3 copper for it. You declined, politely, like a fool. You said it wasn't for sale yet, said it was for someone local, said you could make him one later, better even, if he came back in a week. He smiled the way men do when they're already done listening, said he'd be back, said he'd tell everyone he met about the genius blacksmith of the smokehouse forge. You watched him leave with a wave and boots too clean for someone who claimed to walk village to village. You forgot about it. Until a month later. You traveled to the next town over for iron. Your own supplier's stock was brittle, and you'd finally scraped enough coin together for something decent. You found the merchant's cart in the square before you found the smithy. A bright blue tarp stretched over rows of tools, locks, and hinges stacked like treasure. You stopped mid-step when you saw it. Your hinge. Right down to the twist in the middle. The curve was shallower, the cut sloppier, but it was yours. Even your notches, the ones you thought were just part of the draft, were there like scars on a copy. Except this one had a name stamped into the base. Not yours. His. You stood there long enough for a child to bump into you. Long enough for the merchant to notice you. He didn't flinch, didn't hide. He just raised his chin slightly, the way a man does when he's daring you to speak. You didn't. You turned and walked away before your hands did something your tongue couldn't afford. Back home, you pulled the original hinge from your shelf, ran your thumb over the groove. You thought it might feel different now. It didn't. Still smooth, still clean, still yours, and still useless. You didn't have his reach. Didn't have a cart or a horse or even the time to travel 3 villages over without starving. You had ideas and cracked gloves and a reputation that didn't stretch past the next farm. He had charm and boots and an audience. You think about that sometimes when shaping something new, whether it's safer to keep it simple, whether it's worth it to be clever, whether the next visitor will leave with more than just compliments. You don't stop making things. You can't. It's in your hands, your breath, the muscle memory of hammer and spark. But now, when someone watches too closely, you move between them and the work. And when they smile too wide, you don't smile back. It starts with a sound you've never heard before. A low groan, deep and wrong, like the forge itself is clearing its throat with bad intentions. Then the crack, sharp, final, and louder than anything that should come from a block of iron older than half the village. You drop the hammer mid-swing, step back without thinking, and stare at the anvil like it just died in front of you. Which, in a way, it has. It split clean through the waist, like something gave out under the skin. The top plate sits askew, mocking you with its crooked grin. A piece of your shop, your life, your body lies broken on the floor. You crouch beside it, touch the jagged edge, and whisper something you're not even sure is a word. Then you scream, not out of fear, or pain, or rage, but because you don't know what else to do. You scream the way a man does when something sacred falls apart, when years of labor decide they're tired of holding on. It echoes off the stone walls, bounces through the coals, and crawls out the door like smoke. Someone hears you, of course. They always do when it's the worst time. The tanner pokes his head in and asks if you're all right. You say nothing. Just stand there, hands blackened, chest heaving, beside the ruined heart of your workshop. He sees the anvil, whistles through his teeth, and grins. Guess even iron's got its breaking point, he says. You don't laugh, but he does. So does the miller, when he hears. So does the old drunk who sits outside the tavern and says he always knew you beat your tools too hard. By sunset, half the village has a joke, and your name is in it. The other half stops by just to see the corpse, like it's a traveling exhibit, instead of the reason your hands still have purpose. You bury it at night. Dig a shallow hole behind the shop, just deep enough to cover the shame. You lay it down gently, like a body, and press your palm against its surface one last time. It's still cold, still heavy, still stubborn, but it's done. You cover it with dirt and don't mark the spot. Not because you want to forget, but because you'll never be allowed to. The next morning, you prop a smooth boulder on the workbench. It wobbles when you strike it, but you keep going. You wedge it in place with scrap wood and damp cloth, and convince yourself it'll do. Because there's no money for a new anvil. no merchant who'll front the cost, no noble with enough gratitude to spare a proper replacement. Iron doesn't grow on trees, but rocks, those are free. You shape a horseshoe on it by noon. It takes twice as long and bends wrong at the arch, but it's done. The apprentice watches you work in silence. You don't explain the technique. You don't explain anything. Later that week, the priest stops by with a smile and asks if you've found faith in humbler tools. You almost hit him with a chisel. You name the rock stubborn. Not aloud. Just in your head. Because it stays where you put it, takes the hits, and doesn't complain. You hate it. But you use it. Because the work never waits. Not for mourning. Not for mercy. He doesn't knock. Barons don't knock. They arrive. They enter. They claim space like it was always theirs, and you were simply borrowing it until they remembered. You hear the hooves first, sharp and numerous. Then the boots, heavy and polished, stomping into your shop like the start of a siege. The forge hisses at the cold air behind them. You don't turn around yet. You know that voice. He says your name like it's a favor, like you should feel honored that his mouth is dirtying itself with syllables that belong to a peasant. His cloak is red, too clean, trimmed in something that's probably silk and almost definitely stolen through taxes. He's smiling. You've never trusted a smiling noble. He gestures to his guards, who step forward and dump steel on your workbench. Cracked plates, broken straps, a helm that looks like it was used to stop a hammer with someone's face still inside. He says they need it, repaired urgently. There's a skirmish to the west, or a rebellion, or an argument with another baron who thinks his crest should be displayed larger on the church door. It doesn't matter. What matters is that your hands are now conscripted. You glance at the pile. It's trash. Work that would take a week, even if you had proper iron and an apprentice who didn't flinch when sparks flew too close. You ask when it's needed. The baron claps you on the back like your old friends and says, "By sunrise." You ask about payment, a quiet, cautious thing. He laughs, says you'll be compensated accordingly, and your loyalty will be remembered. Then he walks out, guards in tow, without another word. One of them kicks over your coal bucket on the way. You don't say anything. You just crouch down and start picking it up with your bare hands. Loyalty, apparently, is worth less than coal dust. You work through the night. Not because you want to, but because you understand what happens to men who say no to barons. Your forge roars, greedier than usual, eating wood faster than you can feed it. Your fingers blister and bleed, and you use the same rag to wipe sweat and blood without bothering to separate the two. The breastplate won't curve properly. The helmet's rim refuses to sit flush. The steel is old, brittle, and wrong, and your hammer swings feel like apologies to metal that doesn't want to be here. Your apprentice falls asleep sitting up. You don't wake him. The sun rises with a quiet kind of cruelty, spilling light over half-finished straps and seams that won't hold. You hand the armor over anyway. They load it into the cart like it belongs to them. Because it does. The baron doesn't return. He sends a man with a scroll and a wax seal. The scroll says thank you. The seal says shut up. There's no coin. Not even a scrap of food or a polite lie about future work. Just the weight of silence and the sound of hooves fading back toward the keep. You watch the dust settle. Then you walk back inside. The forge is cold. The apprentice stirs and asks if they paid. You don't answer. Just reach for the tongs again. Because there's always more work. And no one pays the blacksmith until the blade is at their throat. And sometimes not even then. The knight rides into the square like he owns it. His armor catches the sun and throws it back into the eyes of everyone foolish enough to look. His horse is sleek, restless, trained to stomp with authority. The villagers part like sheep, eager to see what spectacle he'll bring. It doesn't take long. 2 guards drag a man into the square. Dirty, wide-eyed, bleeding from somewhere beneath his tunic. They say he stole bread, maybe grain, maybe just looked the wrong way at the wrong person. The details don't matter. The punishment does. The knight draws the blade without ceremony. It sings as it leaves the scabbard, a clean, familiar ring. Your work has that sound. You forged that sword. You remember it, not because it was special, but because you shaped the fuller, with an edge file worn nearly to the bone. The hilt didn't balance at first. You ground it down and started over. Twice. You wrapped the grip in dark leather, soaked in vinegar and brine. You remember how the pommel spun just slightly off-center if you held it loose. You told the knight. He didn't care. Now, the sword gleams, like it's proud of what it's about to do. The thief doesn't plead, doesn't fight, just stands there with his arms held fast by two men who won't meet his eyes. The knight steps forward. No speech, no warning, just the same fluid motion you've seen 1,000 times in the forge. Shoulder, elbow, wrist, clean through the middle. The thief doubles over, gasping, hands trying to hold in what won't stay in. You feel nothing. Not horror, not pride, not even surprise. You watch the blood run down your blade's edge, pooling in the dirt, soaking into the hem of the knight's cloak. You recognize how the tip stayed true through the thrust, how the crossguard held firm, how the handle didn't twist under pressure. All the things you made it to do. The crowd gasps like they've just seen the sun fall out of the sky. Someone sobs. Someone else vomits into the mud. The knight wipes the blade on the corpse's tunic, slides it back into the scabbard, and remounts without a word. He doesn't look at you. Why would he? You're just the one who made it possible. Later, after the crowd has shuffled away, pretending they weren't staring, pretending they didn't flinch, you walk over to the stain in the dirt. You stare at it the same way you stare at cooled slag, like it might still move if you blink wrong. Your apprentice asks if you're all right. You nod. You say something about checking the hinges on the forge door. He doesn't press. That night, you lie in bed and think about the curve of the blade, how it glided in so smoothly. You think about the heat you needed to shape the steel, the way your hammer rang off it when it was red and soft and willing. You did your job. The sword did its job. Everyone did what they were supposed to do. So why does your stomach still churn? Why does your chest feel like someone buried a stone in it? You tell yourself it's the cold, the hunger, the work. You tell yourself anything but the truth. That maybe the steel wasn't the only thing shaped in fire. He tells you overbred, not a dramatic moment, no slamming of tools or storming out. Just a quiet mutter between bites of something you can barely call food. Says he's been thinking. Says the tanner has work. Says it pays better. Cleaner. Softer, he says. Like that's the magic word that will explain it all. Like he's been choking on soot and the idea of sunlight has finally cleared his lungs. You nod once, like you expected it. You didn't. You thought he'd stay. Maybe not forever, but long enough. Long enough to pass on the rhythm of the hammer, the difference between iron that lies and iron that speaks. You even started giving him your better tools without saying it aloud. Let him use the rasp you've had since you were his age. Let him shape hinges on his own. Taught him how to temper with your back turned, so it would feel like confidence, not instruction. But the tanner has coin. The tanner smells like hides instead of smoke. The tanner has clean boots and softer hours, and a smile that doesn't come through cracked teeth. You say, "Good luck," and mean half of it. You say, "Take the rest of the bread," and mean none of it. You hope he trips. You hope he steps on a nail and limps for 3 days, and smells tanning acid on his fingers until he can't taste anything else. Then you hope he's fine, because he's still a boy, even if he walks like a man now. And part of you remembers being that boy, wanting something different, wanting out. He leaves at dusk with a satchel that used to be yours. Doesn't even look back. just a wave, half-hearted, tossed behind him like he's scattering ash instead of memory. You stand at the forge, alone, the coals too low to matter, and your gloves still damp from this morning's rain. You tell yourself this is freedom. No more watching over his shoulder. No more correcting the angle of his strikes. No more bandaging clumsy burns or explaining that you can't sharpen blades by eye alone. You last 2 hours before pouring yourself a drink. The tavern is half empty. A few men sleep at tables. One argues with a stool. You find your usual seat by the wall, the one that doesn't wobble if you lean just right. The barkeep doesn't ask what's wrong. He's smarter than that. Just fills the tankard and walks away. You sit there long enough to forget your name, long enough to remember his. The way he used to smile after a clean weld. The time he dropped a horseshoe in the trough and acted like it was a sword. The dumb questions, the smarter ones. The way he once said your forge smelled like stories. You laughed at him then. You don't laugh now. You cry, quietly, into your tankard. Because the forge is colder now. Because the mornings are going to be quiet in the wrong ways. Because soft work was never an option for you. And maybe you're not angry he left. Maybe you're angry he could. At first, it's just a trick of the ear. A hiss, a crackle, a pop too steady to be random. You pause mid-swing, listening, but nothing repeats. Just fire doing what fire does, burning. But then it happens again. Not a sound this time, a word, or something close enough that your brain shapes it into meaning. You laugh to yourself, shake it off like ash from your sleeve, and go back to work. The next night, the whisper comes again. Softer, just under the bellows wheeze. You lean in, trying to catch the shape of it, and the fire flares like it knows you're listening. It says something that could be your name, or maybe the name you gave to the anvil you buried behind the shed. You blink. The forge is quiet again. You mutter, "Enough," under your breath, and hammer harder. But once you've heard it, you can't unhear it. Now, every breath of heat sounds like a murmur. Every flare, like laughter. The coals groan when the iron touches them. The tongs creak like they're whispering secrets into your palm. You press them tighter, hoping it's just in your head, that this is what happens when you work alone too long and sleep too little. But part of you wonders, what if this is what being a real blacksmith sounds like? The old ones used to say the fire spoke to those who listened, that the forge was a gate, not a tool, that metal could remember. You used to laugh at that. Smokehouse myths for weak minds and bored apprentices. But now you're not sure. You've worked through winter, through hunger, through heartbreak, through silence so heavy it could crush ribs. Maybe this is what happens when you go far enough. Maybe you've crossed some line without knowing it. Or maybe you're cracking like your anvil. You find yourself talking to the flame. At first it's just curses, the usual muttered oaths when things go wrong. But then you start asking it questions. You ask if the iron is ready, if the blade is balanced, if the joint will hold. You wait for the answer in the flicker of the light, in the way the smoke curls. You pretend it answers. Sometimes you don't have to pretend. One night, deep in the hours no one owns, the fire says something clear. You stop mid-stroke, hand frozen, heart stuttering. You lean in close. The flames lean too. The words don't make sense, but they fill your ears like a chant, a rhythm, a code. You whisper back without thinking. You're not scared. Not exactly. You're tired. And tired people will believe anything that keeps them company. By now the tools don't just creak. They hum. The hammer hums loudest when it strikes true. The tongs buzz in your grip. The coals shift to show you shapes, warnings, encouragement. You listen, you nod, you speak. It feels like prayer without the guilt. The villagers avoid your shop more than usual. Even the priest keeps his distance, mumbling something about unquiet energies and pagan tongues. You don't mind. The forge doesn't judge. It just burns. Maybe this is madness. Maybe it's magic. Maybe it's just what happens when a man spends too many years talking to metal and no one talks back. Either way, the fire knows your name now, and you don't feel alone anymore. You don't plan to do it. Not really. It starts like any other job. Cold morning, stiff joints, empty stomach. You light the forge, feed it kindling and memory. You pull out a strip of iron without thinking. Muscle moves before mind. You don't realize what you're making until the first one's done. Small, sharp, simple. A nail. You stare at it for too long. Its head is slightly off-center. The shaft wobbles, not enough to ruin it, just enough to be yours. You lay it on the bench and make another. This one's straighter. The third glints brighter. You keep going. 14 nails. No pattern, no commission. Just forged in silence, one after the other. You don't ask yourself why. You already know. You name the first one. Father. He said you'd never last a winter. You did, barely. The second is apprentice. The boy who ran. The third, silence. For all the times you swallowed your anger and let nobles pay in empty words. You keep going. The fourth is armor, not because of the piece you made, but because of the man who wore it and never came back. The fifth is hinge, for the invention no one remembers. The sixth is laughter, because you can't remember the last time it came from your chest without feeling borrowed. By the seventh, your fingers cramp. You don't stop. You work slower, intentional. The eighth is bread. You gave your last piece away and told yourself it felt good. It didn't. The ninth is fire, for the way it talks to you now, and for the way you talk back. The 10th, name. You stopped hearing your own unless it came with a demand. You miss it. By the 11th, the forge is low. The metal fights you. You let it. That one's luck, for the way it never showed up when you needed it most. The 12th, coin. You've held more in debt than in your palm. The 13th is forgiveness, shaped longer than the others. It takes more time to cool. And the last, the 14th, you call it hope. You tap it into shape carefully, slower than the rest. Its head shines like you polished it on purpose. You didn't, but it gleams all the same. You line them up in a row on the workbench, like soldiers, like gravestones, 14 nails, not coffin-sized, just yours. You think of the old tales where blacksmiths made their own deathbeds, where steel bends to a man's will, even at the end. You don't believe in that, but you believe in these. You wrap them in cloth and slide them into a wooden box with no lock. You don't know if you'll ever use them. Maybe someone else will. Maybe they'll find them 100 years from now and wonder what kind of man names his regrets in iron. Maybe they'll understand. You bank the fire, rub your hands. The forge flickers in the corner like it's been watching. You don't meet its gaze. You've done enough talking for one night. Tomorrow, someone will want a sword, a horseshoe, a hinge, and you'll make it, because that's what you do. Until you don't. The forge dies slowly. Not with a bang, not with a hiss, just the slow retreat of heat, the dimming of light, the final breath of something that's been with you longer than most people. You don't feed it again. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. The coals lose their red, fade to gray, and then to black. You don't stir. You just watch. You finished the last order that morning, a horseshoe. Simple old work. You shaped it clean, dipped it in the trough, and set it on the rack with the others. No one came for it. No one will. The horse probably died 2 winters ago. You just kept making them out of habit. Routine keeps the hands moving when the rest of you forgets how. Now there's nothing left to do. Your tools are lined up on the bench, clean and waiting. The anvil's still chipped where the apprentice dropped that pike head years ago. You never fixed it. Every time your hammer struck near the crack, it echoed a little wrong, like a voice breaking. You learn to avoid that spot. Your hands twitch when the silence sets in. They're not used to stillness. Even when you slept, they'd curl around invisible hammers, clench at ghosts. Now they lie on your chest like strangers. The bones ache. You can feel every nail, every burn, every regret packed beneath the skin like gravel under a boot sole. You lie down on the floor. It's cold, but not cruel. The kind of cold that feels like truth. The stone is familiar. You've knelt here to clean soot, to find fallen tools, to pick up pieces. You've bled on this floor. You've laughed on it. You've cursed louder than thunder and whispered softer than smoke. Now you just breathe. The quiet presses in from all sides. It's not peace. It's absence. You didn't realize how loud the forge was, how constant. Crackling, groaning, humming like it knew secrets you hadn't earned yet. Without it, the shop feels hollow. You can hear every creak of timber, every drip from the leak you never fixed. Even your own breath feels out of place. You think of the first time you lit that fire. You were young, hungry, stupid with hope. You thought iron could be shaped like fate. If you hit it hard enough, bent it just right, it would become what you needed it to be. You learned quickly. Steel doesn't care about your dreams. It only listens to fire. And now the fire is gone. You wait for someone to knock on the door, for a voice to call your name, for someone to ask for nails, for hinges, for a miracle. But no one comes. They've stopped needing you. Or maybe they never did. Maybe you were just part of the noise, the background grind of village life, easier to forget than remember. You close your eyes. The darkness behind your lids is warmer than the forge was. You don't sleep. Not really. You rest in the shape of sleep. You let yourself pretend, just for a moment, that tomorrow you'll wake, stretch your hands, and strike the first blow of the day. That the fire will flicker back to life. That the tools will hum. That the silence will lift. But you know better. Some fires aren't meant to be relit, and some hands were only made to burn. They bury you behind the workshop, near the tree that never grew right. The roots are gnarled like your hands were, twisted from years of strain and weather. You're placed next to the anvil, the one that cracked like a spine, too tired to hold its shape. They dig the hole shallow, just deep enough for the dirt to cover what's left. There's no coffin, just cloth and quiet. The priest speaks like he's late for lunch. His robe is too clean, his words too dry. He says you serve the village, says you knew the value of labor, says God forgives even the fire. You'd laugh if your lungs still worked. The villagers stand in a crooked line. None of them cry. Most keep their hats on. Someone spits. It's not clear if it's from grief or habit. They say, he worked hard, like it's enough. Then they walk away. The forge stays empty for a week. Dust settles where heat once lived. Your tools rust faster than they should, like they know you're gone, and see no point in waiting. A bird nests on the windowsill. The wind creeps through the cracks, and still, no one enters. Until they do. It's a boy, young, thinner than you ever were. He opens the door like it might bite him. He steps inside slow, eyes wide, hands steady. He looks at the anvil, your broken one, then at the pile of coal that never got used. He kneels, not in reverence, in curiosity. He lights the forge wrong the first time. The flame coughs and dies, but he tries again and again until the fire catches. The sound is low, a whisper, a memory. The village hears it but says nothing. They pretend it's the wind, pretend they don't feel heat returning to the air. The priest crosses himself, just once, then walks a little faster past your door. The boy doesn't know what he's doing. He lifts your old hammer and nearly drops it. It's too heavy, too worn, too much. But he doesn't put it down. The forge doesn't care who holds the hammer, only that it swings. Days pass, then weeks. He burns himself, cries once, then keeps going. The flame stays lit. The anvil hums again, even cracked. Steel begins to change shape under unsure hands. No one tells him to stop. The villagers bring nails, axes, old horseshoes. No payment at first, just awkward nods and awkward hope. The boy accepts it all. He doesn't talk much. He listens. To the metal, to the wind, maybe to something more. One night, he digs behind the workshop. He finds your marker. Just a flat stone. No name. No date. He places his hand on it. He doesn't speak. But the forge flares behind him, briefly, like it knows. And in the dirt beside the anvil, where your bones rest with ash and rust, something shifts. Not a ghost, not a curse. Just the echo of iron remembering the hand that taught it how to sing. And so the fire begins again.